Pip Fitz Amobi stared at her screen until the words "Stop digging" burned into her vision. What began as a school project had turned into a literal hunt, and Pip was about to learn that some secrets are better left buried. Months earlier, the idea had seemed much simpler. Pip was a 17-year-old student known for her diligence and her commitment to her studies, so when the time came to choose a topic for her final school project, everyone expected something academic. Instead, she chose a ghost that had haunted her town of Little Kilton for 5 years. She decided to investigate the disappearance of Andie Bell. In the eyes of the community and the law, the case was closed. The narrative was set in stone. Andie's boyfriend, Sal Singh, had killed her in a fit of rage and then taken his own life out of a sense of overwhelming guilt. Pip, however, could not shake the feeling that the town's collective memory was flawed. She remembered Sal not as a murderer, but as the kind older boy who had once protected her from bullies. To find the truth, she had to act like a journalist, recording her progress in a production log and interviewing those the police had long since stopped questioning. She started with the police themselves, learning the cold statistics of missing person cases, only to find that in Little Kilton, the low probability of a tragic ending didn't matter. To the neighbors, Sal's guilt was a settled fact. This prejudice was most visible at the Singh family home. When Pip approached the house, she didn't see a normal residence. She saw a building marked by the town's hatred. 5 years of graffiti and hushed stares had turned the property into a monument of shame. It was there that she first encountered Ravi, Sal's younger brother. Ravi was 20 now, but he carried the weight of someone much older. When Pip first explained that she wanted to prove Sal's innocence for a school assignment, Ravi greeted her with deep cynicism. His defensive walls were high, built from years of being shunned by a community that treated his entire family like accomplices. He was weary of people poking at his brother's memory, but Pip's persistence and her genuine belief in Sal's character eventually wore him down. The moment they became partners wasn't marked by a grand gesture, but by a shared realization that they were the only two people left willing to look at the evidence with fresh eyes. Ravi admitted that he had tried to clear his brother's name years ago, but his parents, crushed by the weight of public judgment, had urged him to let it go. Seeing Pip's determination gave him a reason to try one last time. As they began to dig into the old files, the technical inconsistencies ignored by the police started to surface. They looked at Sal's phone, which had been returned to the family after the case was closed. Between the time Andie vanished and the moment Sal's body was found, he had tried to call her 112 times. To the police, this was the desperate act of a killer trying to create an alibi. To Pip and Ravi, it looked like the frantic behavior of a boy who was terrified for the girl he loved. Then there was the confession. The final text message sent from Sal's phone to his father was a brief admission of guilt, but it contained something Sal never used: correct punctuation. Every other message in his history was casual, lowercase, and devoid of full stops. This final note was different. It was cold, structured, and felt like it had been written by someone else entirely. Pip's investigation soon led her to the people who were supposed to be Sal's closest friends, Naomi Ward and Max Hastings. These were the people who had initially given Sal an alibi, only to retract it days later, claiming they had lied to protect him before the truth became too much to bear. When Pip sat down with them, the tension was thick. Naomi, the daughter of Pip's favorite history teacher, was clearly fragile. She had been through her own tragedies, including the loss of her mother, and she seemed haunted by the events of that night. She spoke of the arguments between Sal and Andie, painting a picture of a relationship that was beginning to fray. Max, on the other hand, was casual to the point of being unsettling. He had survived a battle with leukemia and seemed to view the world with a detached, almost bored perspective. He spoke of the night of the party with a shrug, mentioning that Sal had left early to get some sleep. Through these conversations, Pip noticed subtle cracks. Naomi mentioned being absent from the group for a period during the party, a detail that hadn't been prominent in the original reports. Max's indifference felt like a mask, a way to avoid looking too closely at the gaps in his own story. The more Pip spoke to them, the more she realized that the truth the police had accepted was built on the word of people who were all hiding something. The biggest shift in the investigation came when Pip began to look at Andie Bell herself. The media had portrayed Andie as the golden girl, the beautiful, popular student whose life was tragically cut short. But as Pip interviewed Andie's old friends, Chloe and Emma, a different person began to emerge. Andie was not just a victim. She was a girl with a darker reputation and hidden pressures. Emma admitted that being around Andie was exhausting. She was someone who could build a person up or tear them down with a single word. Beneath the perfect exterior, Andie was keeping secrets that had nothing to do with Sal. There were rumors of a relationship with an older man and whispers of a life that her parents, Jason and Dawn, knew nothing about. Even the Bell household was not the image of perfection it seemed. Jason was a man who ruled his home with a cruel, competitive streak, often berating his wife and daughters. Pip realized that Andie's life was far more complicated than a simple romance gone wrong. She found out that Andie's younger sister, Becca, had been hospitalized for self-harm shortly before the disappearance, adding another layer of trauma to the family's history. Every new piece of information suggested that Andie was running away from something, or perhaps toward something dangerous. Through her talks with Elliot Ward, her teacher and Naomi's father, Pip tried to reconcile the Sal he knew, a brilliant student with a future at Oxford, with the monster the town described. Elliot spoke highly of Sal's intellect, confirming that nothing in his behavior suggested a violent end. It became clear that the police had focused on Sal not because the evidence was undeniable, but because he was an easy target in a town where people like the newspaper reporter Stanley Forbes were quick to use race as a motive for murder. By the time Pip finished her first few weeks of research, the foundation of the case had shifted. The good boy who supposedly committed a murder was looking more like a victim, and the good girl who vanished was looking more like a person trapped in a web of her own making. Pip had started this project for a grade, but she was now deeply entwined in the lives of the Singhs and the Wards. She began to see that her town was not the quiet, safe place she had imagined. It was a place where people kept their heads down and ignored the rot beneath the surface. By reopening the file on Andie Bell, Pip had done more than just start a school project. She had challenged the local hierarchy and questioned the people who felt most comfortable in the dark. As she sat in her room, looking over her growing list of persons of interest and the map of a night 5 years ago, Pip realized that Andie Bell had dangerous secrets, and that by reopening the case, Pip had just stepped into a living shadow. The printer in the quiet hallway whirred to life, but it wasn't spitting out a school assignment. As the paper slid out, Pip saw the words, "This is your final warning." Someone wasn't just watching her anymore, they were inside her house. The feeling of safety that usually wrapped around her family home had evaporated, replaced by a sharp, prickling paranoia. It started during a camping trip meant to celebrate her friend Kara's birthday. Out in the dark woods, away from the streetlights of Little Kilton, Pip had spotted a figure lingering in the shadows. When her friend Connor gave chase, the intruder vanished, leaving behind a simple, typewritten note on a white piece of paper: "Stop digging, Pippa." The note changed everything. It was no longer just an investigation into a 5-year-old cold case, it was a live wire. Pip began to realize that the reason the truth about Andie Bell had remained buried for so long was that someone was actively standing guard over the grave. To fight back, Pip leaned into a darker side of her own personality. She used her friendship with Kara to gain access to the Ward family printer, secretly changing the settings so that every document printed in that house would leave a digital trail for her to follow. It was a morally grey move, one that made her stomach twist, but the stakes had risen beyond the rules of a school project. As she pushed deeper into the secret life Andie Bell had led, Pip discovered a side of the town's golden girl that few had dared to acknowledge. Through interviews with Andie's old circle, she began to dismantle the image of the perfect student. The more people Pip spoke to, the more she heard about Andie's darker reputation. She wasn't just a popular girl, she was a calculated bully who used the internet to humiliate her rivals. One victim, a girl named Nat, had been catfished and humiliated so badly she still carried the scars of that trauma. But the most shocking revelation came from the remnants of Andie's hidden world. Pip discovered that Andie had been a high-stakes player in the local drug trade. She hadn't just been a user, she was a dealer. Working with a local man named Howie Bowers, Andie had operated a business selling weed and pills, specifically ivory, to the teenagers of Little Kilton. She had a burner phone hidden under a loose floorboard in her wardrobe and a business arrangement that kept her pockets full of cash. Pip's search for the source led her into the heart of the town's teenage underworld, the calamity parties. These were legendary, lawless gatherings held in the woods or abandoned spots where the town's youth went to hide from the prying eyes of their parents and the police. It was here that Andie had reigned, not as a student leader, but as a provider. Tracking down Howie Bowers required a level of bravery Pip didn't know she possessed. She went undercover at a local party, pretending to partake in the very culture she was investigating just to get a phone number. After a tense encounter with a boy named Stephen, she finally cornered Howie in a desolate parking lot. By using photos she'd secretly taken of his other clients, including a local journalist and a student athlete, she blackmailed the dealer into talking. Howie confirmed the worst. Andie was a professional. She was cold, focused, and entirely hidden from her boyfriend, Sal. But as Pip listened to the dealer, she realized a vital piece of the puzzle had been sitting in front of her all along. In the notes of Sal's old phone, she found the license plate of Howie's car. Sal hadn't been a killer, he had been a protector. He had found out about Andie's drug dealing and was trying to save her from herself. He had been evasive with the police not because he was hiding a murder, but because he was trying to keep Andie's secret safe even after she disappeared. Through all of this, the bond between Pip and Ravi Singh deepened. They were no longer just a student and a source, they were a team. Ravi was the only person Pip felt she could truly trust, the only one who understood the weight of the shadows they were moving through. When she finally confessed to him that she had been holding back some of Sal's interview transcripts because they made his brother look suspicious, Ravi didn't turn away. Instead, they stood together in the face of the growing danger, two people who had been placed in the crosshairs by a town that preferred a convenient lie over a difficult truth. The investigation was now uncovering a web of men who might have had a reason to want Andie Bell gone. Pip's notes were becoming cluttered with names and connections. She found herself circling a specific set of initials in Andie's old planner, AS. These initials were paired with secret meeting times, tucked away in the margins of the days leading up to the disappearance. It was a subtle, nagging detail. Little Kilton was a small place, but it was home to several men who could fit those letters. Was it a secret lover, a buyer, or someone more dangerous? The pressure was mounting from all sides. Even Pip's trusted history teacher, Elliot Ward, became a person of interest when she learned Andie had held a deep, unexplained grudge against him. Every person she talked to seemed to have a second face. Max Hastings, one of Sal's supposed best friends, was revealed to be one of Andie's customers, buying pills from her while pretending to mourn her. He even held onto a private, compromising photo of Andie, showing a total lack of respect for the girl he claimed to miss. The threats were no longer just notes left in the woods or printed warnings in the hallway. They were becoming personal and vicious. While Pip was out with her family, a message flashed on her screen from an unknown number, calling her a stupid bitch and telling her to leave the case alone while she still had the chance. The language was sharp, gendered, and dripping with a specific kind of local malice. Pip realized that she was no longer looking for a ghost. She was looking for someone who was still very much alive, someone who walked the same streets she did and perhaps sat in the same cafes. This person knew her name, her habits, and where she lived. They were watching her progress and grew more desperate with every secret she unearthed. The good girl image that Pip had maintained her whole life was starting to fracture. She was lying to her friends, stealing data from her neighbors, and walking into dark parking lots to confront criminals. The school project had become a secondary concern. The real goal was survival and justice for a boy who had been framed by a town's prejudice. As she sat in her room, the glow of her laptop screen the only light in the dark, Pip stared at the latest threat. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The game had changed. She wasn't just an investigator anymore, she was a target. Every step she took toward the truth about Andie and Sal was a step closer to the person who had already killed to keep that truth hidden. Pip was no longer just playing a game, she was being hunted. The silence in the house was the loudest thing Pip had ever heard. Usually, the jingle of a collar or the soft padding of paws filled the halls, but tonight, there was only a chilling void. Pip had been warned to stop digging, and now, the dirt was being thrown on someone she loved. The investigation into the death of Sal Singh and the disappearance of Andie Bell had long since ceased to be a school assignment. It had become a war of attrition between Pip and a ghost who refused to stay in the past. To find the next piece of the puzzle, Pip had to step further away from the good girl the town expected her to be. Following a trail of cryptic notes in Andie's old planner, she discovered the recurring initials IH scribbled next to secret meeting times. It didn't take long for her analytical mind to connect the letters to the Ivy House Hotel, a quiet establishment on the outskirts of town. With Ravi as her reluctant lookout, Pip embarked on a daring mission to the hotel. She needed to see the guest logs from 5 years ago to identify the mysterious AS who had been meeting Andie in secret. The mission was a strange mix of hope and frustration. At the hotel, she encountered an elderly woman who claimed to have seen Andie only weeks ago, a claim quickly dismissed as the byproduct of dementia. Despite the confusion, the visit confirmed one thing: Andie had been using the Ivy House as a sanctuary for her secret life. Pip realized that the initials AS might be an alias, a fake name carefully chosen to hide the identity of an authority figure. This realization changed the way Pip walked the halls of her own school. She found herself observing the male staff with a new, cynical lens. Every teacher, every mentor, every man who held a position of trust was now a potential suspect. The secret older guy wasn't a monster from a movie, he was likely someone respectable, someone the town liked, someone like her favorite history teacher, Elliot Ward. The suspicion was a poison that seeped into her daily life, making her feel like a stranger in her own home. She sat at dinner with her parents and Josh, laughing at their jokes and eating their food, while her mind was miles away, calculating timelines and motives. The weight of the secrets she carried made her feel hollow. To prove Sal's innocence, Pip turned her attention to the digital world. She used Naomi Ward's social media password, provided by a trusting Kara, to hack into private accounts. What she found was a mathematical bombshell. Max Hastings had uploaded a series of photos from the night of Andie's disappearance. In one wide-angle shot, taken at 12:09 a.m., Sal Singh was clearly visible with the group. The police timeline claimed Sal had already left to commit a murder by that hour. Pip and Ravi reenacted the night, timing the drives and the walks with clinical precision. The math didn't lie. If Sal was in that photo at 12:09, he could not have killed Andie Bell. Armed with this proof, Pip confronted Naomi and Max directly. In a tearful, panicked admission, Naomi revealed the truth of the New Year's Eve hit and run. They had been blackmailed by an anonymous sender into destroying Sal's alibi. They were victims of a different kind of crime, but their silence had cost Sal his life. The breakthrough should have been a victory, but the shadows were closing in. Pip returned home to find that someone had been in her bedroom. Her production log had been edited with a chilling repetition, "You need to stop this, Pippa." The intruder hadn't just broken into her house, they had broken into her sanctuary. She tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, hiding the spare key and lying to her mother about local break-ins, but the paranoia was a constant companion. Then came the day the silence started. It happened during a routine walk. One moment, the family dog, Barney, was there, sniffing at the brush along the woods of Little Kilton. The next, he was gone. Pip's world narrowed down to a frantic, heart-wrenching search. She sprinted through the trees, screaming his name until her throat was raw, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The woods, once a place of childhood games, had become a labyrinth of malice. The confirmation came as a devastating final warning. Barney was found dead, a victim of the very person Pip was trying to unmask. The killer hadn't just targeted her, they had targeted the most innocent part of her life. The grief that followed was raw and suffocating. Pip sat in her room, the air heavy with the scent of a dog who was no longer there. She couldn't bring herself to look at Barney's empty bed, tucked away in the corner. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his trusting face, and the guilt hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her search for justice had caused an unforgivable tragedy. She had played a game with a murderer, and Barney had paid the price. For a moment, the good girl was broken. She felt the urge to delete every file, burn every notebook, and let the town's lies win. The silence in the house was a reminder of her failure. She had wanted to save Sal's family from their grief, but instead, she had brought that same darkness into her own home. She felt the crushing weight of her parents' concern and the confusion of her younger brother, Josh, who didn't understand why the world had suddenly turned so cold. But as she sat in the dark, staring at the evidence board through a veil of hot, angry tears, her resolve began to harden. She looked at the photos of Sal, the notes on Andie's drug deals, and the map of a night that had ruined so many lives. She realized that if she stopped now, the killer wouldn't just win, they would be validated. Barney's death would become a footnote in a successful cover-up. The initials AS stared back at her from the planner. It was a name, a mask, a secret that someone was willing to kill for. Pip wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her fingers trembling but her heart turning to stone. The time for being the good girl was over. She couldn't stop now, because if she did, the killer would walk free, and the silence in her house would never end. She reached for her laptop and opened the backup files Ravi had insisted she keep. She was no longer just a student doing a project. She was a hunter, and the person who had taken Barney was about to find out exactly what happens when you push a good girl too far. The name was a ghost, a carefully constructed lie designed to hide a monster in plain sight. Andrew Smith's son didn't exist in the birth records or the census, but he had a face, a car, and a secret that had stayed buried for 5 years. Pip finally knew who she was looking for, and he was someone she had trusted her entire life. Before she could reach the truth, Pip had to endure the ultimate defeat. The killer had found her pressure point. When Barney, her family's golden retriever, went missing during a walk in the woods, the investigation stopped being a puzzle and became a hostage situation. The messages from the unknown number were no longer just warnings, they were demands. To save her dog, Pip was told she had to destroy everything she had built. She drove to the parking lot of the Little Kilton Tennis Club, her heart heavy and her hands trembling. Under the watchful, invisible eyes of her blackmailer, she began a performance of total surrender. She took her laptop and her external memory sticks, the physical heart of her investigation, and smashed them into useless plastic and metal. To anyone watching, Pip Fitz Amobi was a girl who had been broken. She even told Ravi that she was quitting, lying to the one person who had stood by her, just to keep the danger away from her front door. But the surrender was a calculated lie. While the physical evidence was destroyed, the truth was safely tucked away in a digital cloud backup. Pip was playing a long game. The grief of Barney's death, a loss that felt like a hole in her own chest, didn't stop her. It sharpened her. It turned her grief into a clinical, focused rage. Working in secret with Ravi once she confessed the truth to him, Pip returned to the clues that had haunted her. They went back to the AS alias from the Ivy House hotel logs. They pored over the guest records until the name jumped off the page, Andrew Smith's son. It was a fake name, a mask for a secret lover, but the handwriting and the dates told a story the police had missed. Andie Bell wasn't meeting a stranger. She was meeting someone who knew how to hide. The breakthrough came from an unlikely place, a temporary phone number. When Naomi Ward called Pip from a new phone, Pip noticed the digits were nearly identical to a number scribbled in Andie's old planner. Naomi mentioned her father, Elliot Ward, had a spare SIM card lying around. That small, casual comment was the thread that unspooled the entire tapestry. Pip went to the Ward house under the guise of a school friend, but she was there as a spy. Using the tracking software she had previously installed on the family printer, she found the stop digging note waiting in the print queue. It was an unsaved document from Elliot's account. The man who had been her favorite history teacher, the man who had encouraged her to pursue her academic dreams at Cambridge, was the one who had invaded her home. He was the one who had taken her dog. He was Andrew Smith's son. The weight of the betrayal was a physical blow. Pip had to sit in the Ward living room, carving pumpkins and making small talk with a man she now knew was a murderer. She watched his hands, the same hands that had graded her papers and offered her tea, and wondered how they could be the same hands that had strangled the life out of little Kilton's memory. The time for research was over. It was time for a sting operation. Pip devised a Trojan horse plan that was as daring as it was dangerous. She waited for a moment when she needed a ride home from school and faked a limp, a small performance to ensure Elliot would offer her a lift in his silver Peugeot. During the short drive, Pip purposefully dropped her phone. She let it slide deep under the passenger seat, silent and with a full battery, its location-sharing feature active. That night, she and Ravi sat in her bedroom, watching a pulsing blue dot on a digital map. They were no longer looking for clues, they were hunting a predator. They watched as the dot moved away from the Ward's current residence and traveled toward the edge of town, finally coming to a halt at a place Pip recognized from her research, 117, Coast Road. This was the isolated, abandoned property the Wards had lived in years ago. It was a house of shadows, a place the family had left behind after the death of Elliot's wife. As Pip followed the GPS signal to the driveway, the eerie atmosphere of the house pressed in on her. The windows were dark eyes, and the overgrown garden felt like it was trying to swallow the building whole. The air was biting and cold, smelling of damp earth and old secrets. Pip stood on the same ground where this entire mystery had begun 5 years ago. She felt the irony of the moment. The girl who wanted to be a journalist was now a trespasser in the heart of a killer's sanctuary. Every instinct told her to run, to call the police, to hide. But then she thought of Barney. She thought of Sal Singh, whose name had been dragged through the mud for half a decade. She thought of the person who had taken her dog and realized they were now just a few feet away, hidden behind those rotting wooden walls. She and Ravi moved through the darkness, their breaths hitching in their chests. The GPS was precise. Elliot Ward was inside. Pip speculated that perhaps the mystery was even deeper than they imagined. Could Andie Bell be alive? Was this the secret room where he had kept her? The thought was a spark of hope in a very dark place. Pip looked at the silver car parked in the shadows and then back at the house. This was the confrontation she had been building toward since the first entry in her production log. There was no more academic distance. There were no more school project guidelines. There was only the truth and the man who would do anything to keep it buried. She watched the house at 117, Coast Road, her heart hammering against her ribs like a drum. She was standing on the precipice of the final revelation. She knew that once she stepped across that threshold, her life as the good girl would be gone forever. There was no turning back. The attic door groaned, a sound that had been muffled by 5 years of lies. Pip stepped into the small, cramped space, expecting a ghost, but finding something far more haunting, a living person whose existence changed everything she thought she knew about the night Andie Bell vanished. The room was low-ceilinged and smelled of dust and old wood. In the corner, a girl sat huddled on a mattress, her eyes wide and vacant. For a split second, Pip's breath caught, the blonde hair, the pale skin, it looked like the impossible had happened. But as the girl turned into the light, the illusion shattered. This was not Andie Bell. This was someone else entirely, a young woman named Isla Jordan, whose learning disability had made her easy prey for a man looking to recreate the past. The heavy thud of footsteps on the stairs announced the arrival of the man who had built this prison. Elliot Ward stood in the doorway, his shoulders slumped and his face grey with the weight of his own history. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He simply looked at Pip with a hollow expression and let the secret spill out like a long-held breath. Elliot admitted to everything. He spoke of the affair with his student, a relationship that began in the Ivy House Hotel and ended in violence at the very house where they now stood. He recounted their final argument, the way he had pushed Andie, and the sickening thud of her head hitting the edge of a desk. When he had left the room to find a first aid kit, he returned to find the room empty. Andie had vanished into the night. Terrified that he had killed her and that his life was over, Elliot had looked for a way to save himself. He chose Sal Singh. He knew about Naomi's diary, knew about the hit and run, and used that knowledge to blackmail the teenagers into destroying Sal's alibi. He had lured Sal to the woods, drugged him, and staged a suicide to ensure the town would never look for another killer. Later, he had found Isla on the streets, a girl who looked enough like Andie to serve as a living penance for the crime he thought he had committed. He had saved her only to lock her away in a chilling act of replacement. But as the police arrived and the blue lights flashed against the windows of 117 Coast Road, Pip felt a nagging coldness in her chest. If Elliot hadn't killed Andie, if she had walked out of that house alive, then where was she? The answer lay in the one place Pip hadn't looked closely enough, the Bell family home. Days later, Pip sat in the Bell's kitchen, watching Becca Bell prepare tea. The house felt heavy, as if the walls were leaning in. Becca seemed fragile, her eyes hollow, but Pip couldn't stop. She spoke about the drugs Andie sold, the ivory pills that had led to Becca being assaulted by Max Hastings. She spoke about the resentment that must have built up in a younger sister who was bullied and ignored. Becca's hands didn't shake as she poured the tea. She admitted that Andie had come home that night, stumbling and confused, suffering from a brain bleed caused by the fall at Elliot's house. Becca had confronted her sister about the drugs, about the assault, about the misery Andie had caused. Andie, even while dying, had shown no remorse. She had laughed. Then, the internal injury took hold. Andie began to choke, her body failing as she slumped to the floor. Becca hadn't called for help. She had stood over her sister and watched the life fade from her eyes, a silent witness to a slow death. Afterward, she had dragged the body to the backyard and hidden it in the old septic tank, where the metallic scent of decay was masked by the earth. As Becca spoke, the room began to spin for Pip. The tea tasted bitter, a chemical tang coating the back of her throat. She realized too late that Becca had drugged her. The good girl was now a witness who needed to be silenced. Pip stumbled to her feet, her limbs feeling like lead, and crashed through the back door into the darkening woods of Little Kilton. The chase was a nightmare of blurred trees and gasping breaths. Pip's heart hammered against her ribs as she fought the heaviness in her blood. She could hear Becca behind her, a shadow moving through the brush with a desperate, frantic energy. Pip collapsed near the edge of the woods, her vision tunneling, her fingers digging into the cold dirt. Just as the darkness threatened to take her, the sound of sirens and shouting broke the silence. Ravi was there, pulling her back from the brink, his voice a steady anchor in the chaos. The aftermath shook the town to its core. The septic tank was opened, and the remains of Andie Bell were finally recovered, bringing a gruesome end to 5 years of speculation. Elliot, Becca, Max Hastings, and the dealer Howie Bowers were all taken away in handcuffs, each facing the consequences of the secrets they had tried to bury. For the Singh family, the victory was bittersweet. Sal was officially cleared of all charges, his name restored in the eyes of the law, but the brother and son they loved was still gone. Ravi stood with Pip on the day the news broke, his hand in hers, a silent acknowledgement that they had done the impossible. They had found the truth in a town built on lies. 3 months later, the school assembly hall was packed. The air was still, and the weight of the silence was heavy as Pip stood at the podium. This was no longer a school project, it was a final report to the community. When she finished, she didn't look for applause. She reached out and squeezed Ravi's hand behind the wood of the lectern, a private moment of victory in a very public room. They had faced the shadows and come out the other side. The investigation was over. The names were cleared. The good girl was gone, replaced by someone who knew exactly how much the truth could cost. Pip looked out at the audience, her gaze lingering on the empty seats where the Wards and the Bells once sat, and then back to the people who still had to live with what they had done. Any questions?